Don't sign, it's a trap. What happened next shocked everyone in the room. But before we dive in, let me ask you this. If you were in his place, would you trust a stranger with nothing to gain? Or your lifelong business partners who promise the world? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now let's begin. Ethan Cole was not just a businessman, he was a self-made billionaire, the kind of man headlines called the visionary of Chicago. On this crisp autumn morning, he sat at the head of a mahogany boardroom table, the skyline glittering behind him like a crown he had earned. The contract in front of him was monumental, a merger with Sterling Global. Analysts said it would catapult his company, Cole Technologies, into the international stratosphere. Billions were on the line. Reporters waited outside. Investors celebrated early. Even his closest friend and business partner, Adrian Vega, wore a grin that stretched from ear to ear. The air inside that boardroom felt electric, charged with victory. Glasses of champagne had already been poured in anticipation. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, his jaw set, his heart steady. He'd worked his entire life for this moment. One signature, and the future would be his. The pen slid effortlessly into his hand. And then, fate walked in, disguised as something ordinary. The heavy oak door creaked open. In rolled a cleaning cart, its squeaky wheel breaking the silence. No one paid attention. Why would they? She was just a janitor, background noise in the symphony of wealth and power. Isabella Morales, dressed in a plain uniform, whispered a polite, "Sorry, I'll just empty the trash." The executives didn't even glance at her. They were too busy raising toasts to tomorrow, but Isabella moved with purpose. She walked quietly, her steps echoing in Ethan's ears louder than the champagne flutes clinking. She bent to lift the trash can by his chair, her movements calm, deliberate. And then, without looking directly at him, she leaned just close enough for him to hear words that froze the blood in his veins. "Don't sign. It's a trap." It was so soft, so urgent, he thought he imagined it. His hand stopped mid-stroke, the pen hovering just millimeters from the contract. His heart skipped. The pen slipped from his fingers, landing on the table with a hollow thud. The entire room noticed. Adrian leaned forward, confusion etched across his face. "Ethan, is everything all right?" The other executives exchanged puzzled looks. Ethan didn't answer. His eyes darted between the contract, his old friend Adrian, and the retreating figure of Isabella, who was now pushing her cart as if nothing had happened. But his world tilted. Suddenly, nothing felt real. "Gentlemen," Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly, "I need 5 minutes." The room buzzed with murmurs. Adrian forced a laugh, though his eyes narrowed. 5 minutes? Ethan, we've reviewed every line. There's nothing left to change. I said 5 minutes. His tone cut through the chatter. He stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping across the polished floor. Without waiting for objections, he strode toward the door. The hallway was quiet, but Isabella hadn't gone far. She froze as his footsteps thundered closer. "You." His voice was firm, commanding, the voice of a man who controlled boardrooms and entire markets. "Come with me, now." She hesitated, fear flickering across her face, but then she nodded. They walked down the corridor in silence until Ethan pulled her into a small break room, shutting the door behind them, his heart pounding like a war drum. The empire he built stood on the other side of that door, but in this quiet, dimly lit room, it all felt like it was starting to collapse. He turned toward the woman who had just shattered his confidence with a whisper. Isabella Morales stood stiffly, clutching a trash bag as if it were a shield. Her eyes darted between him and the floor, but there was no fear in her voice when he demanded, "Now talk. Why should I believe you? Why would a cleaning lady risk her job, her life even, to tell me not to sign the deal of the century?" For a moment, silence filled the air. Then Isabella lifted her chin. "Because I heard the truth," she said softly. "They're planning to ruin you. Sterling Global isn't a lifeline. It's a trap. And the people tightening the noose are closer to you than you think." Ethan froze. "Who?" Her voice wavered, but the names dropped like grenades. "Adrian Vega and Serena Delgado." The mention of Serena's name felt like a knife. His ex-girlfriend. The woman who once promised him forever, then walked away 2 years ago. The wound had barely healed, and now Isabella claimed Serena was plotting against him. No, Ethan muttered, shaking his head. Adrian has been my partner for 15 years. He's my best friend. And Serena, she's not even in the picture anymore. Isabella reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. I don't blame you for doubting, but I didn't come to you empty-handed. Look. She slid the phone across the table. Ethan leaned over, his breath catching as he saw grainy photos, taken through a crack in an office door. Adrian and Serena together, laughing, whispering, and worse. Leaning close over papers he recognized too well. His merger contract. Then Isabella tapped the screen again. An audio recording began to play. Adrian's voice came first, low and smug. Once he signs, we'll have full control of the assets. Then came Serena's laugh, once his favorite sound, now dripping with poison. David suspects nothing. He's always been too naive. By the time he realizes, we'll already own everything. Ethan's stomach turned. His oldest friend, his first love, betraying him in the same breath. He staggered back, gripping the edge of the counter to steady himself. His chest felt tight. He wanted to dismiss it as fake, but the voices were undeniable. The evidence was there, staring at him, clawing at his mind. Why are you showing me this? Ethan whispered. Because you deserve to know, Isabella said firmly. They're planning to strip you of everything you built. Within 48 hours, you'll lose your company, your reputation, and your future, and you won't even see it coming. Unless you fight back. Her eyes locked with his, steady and unyielding. I couldn't stay silent. Even if it cost me my job. Ethan studied her. She wasn't a lawyer or an executive or a shareholder. She had nothing to gain by warning him. If anything, she was signing her own death warrant. And yet here she was, standing against two people far more powerful than her, armed only with courage. He wanted to believe her, but his mind screamed in protest. Adrian had been by his side since college. They built Cole Technologies from a garage into a billion-dollar empire. They had been through thick and thin together until now. How could that same man betray him? And Serena, she had broken his heart, yes. But was she truly capable of orchestrating corporate fraud? Ethan raked a hand through his hair, trying to breathe. His entire reality felt like quicksand. Do you have more proof? He finally asked, his voice hoarse. Isabella nodded. Yes, documents, transfers, everything. I can show you tonight, here, at 7,000. But I need you to trust me long enough to look at what I've gathered. Ethan stepped closer, his jaw tight, his voice low. If this is some lie, some conspiracy, some game to get attention, you're finished. Do you understand? I do. Isabella's lips trembled, but her gaze did not waver. But if I kept quiet and let you lose everything, I'd never forgive myself. The room seemed to shrink around him. The skyline of Chicago glittered beyond the glass walls, but to Ethan, it looked different now. Colder, sharper, dangerous. He exhaled slowly, the weight of 15 years of loyalty crushing his chest. All right, he said at last. Tonight, 7. Show me everything. Isabella's shoulders sagged with relief. She gave a small nod, then quietly slipped out of the room, pushing her cart as though nothing had happened. Ethan stood there, staring at his reflection in the glass. His face looked the same, but he knew his world had just cracked in two. On one side, his best friend and the woman he once loved. On the other, a cleaning lady with nothing but evidence and conviction. For the first time in his career, Ethan Cole hesitated. Ethan Cole pushed the door open, his heart pounding against his ribs. The boardroom fell silent. All eyes turned to him as he re-entered, the weight of expectation pressing down like a storm cloud. Adrian Vega was leaning over the polished table, speaking quietly with Javier, Sterling's representative. They straightened immediately when they saw Ethan walk in. Did you take care of what you needed? Adrian asked, his voice smooth, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Yes, Ethan said evenly, striding toward the head of the table, but he didn't sit. His gaze swept the contract, then the eager faces surrounding him. He felt the tension in the air, sharp as glass. Actually, Ethan said at last, his tone calm but firm, I think I need to review a few clauses again. Review? Javier frowned, his brows knitting together. Mr. Cole, we spent weeks, months, going over every detail of this document. And that's exactly why I want to take one last look, Ethan replied, his hand closing the folder with deliberate finality. Let's reschedule. The silence was deafening. Glasses of champagne stood untouched, bubbles rising in the still air. Adrian rose slowly, planting his fists on the table. His jaw tightened, his voice low. Ethan, this doesn't make sense. We're wasting valuable time. Sterling has other interested parties, you know that. Ethan's eyes flickered toward him. Cold, steady. For the first time, he noticed the faint crack in Adrian's calm, the flicker of panic behind his confidence. Then let them be, Ethan said, his voice like ice. One night won't make a difference. It will, Adrian snapped, his hands slamming against the table. His voice rose, sharp with agitation. The market is unstable. The stock is up. It's now or never. Ethan studied Adrian carefully. His reaction was too forceful, too desperate. Isabella's warning whispered in his mind. This pressure isn't normal. The decision, Ethan said slowly, his tone unyielding, is mine. Without another word, he picked up the contract, slid it into his leather briefcase, and snapped it shut. I'll see you all tomorrow. He didn't wait for protests. He turned on his heel, his polished shoes echoing across the marble floor, leaving behind a room of furious, frustrated men. The hallway outside felt quieter, but no less heavy. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He had just bought himself 24 hours, time to discover whether Isabella Morales' warning was truth or a dangerous deception. That night, the city lights glittered across the skyline, casting reflections into Ethan's glass office. He sat alone at the long table, the weight of silence pressing down on him. At exactly 7, the door opened quietly. Isabella stepped in, clutching a thin folder close to her chest. I told you I had proof, she said softly. Ethan motioned for her to sit. Show me. She placed the papers on the table and spread them out carefully. The first was a photograph she had taken with her phone, 2 contracts side by side. Look closely, Isabella urged. Ethan leaned in, his eyes scanning line after line. At first they seemed identical, but then he saw it. A single number buried deep within the clauses had been altered. The version Ethan had reviewed gave him 60% controlling interest after the merger, but in the altered contract, the one Isabella claimed Sterling planned to file, he would hold only 20%. His chest tightened. 20? Isabella nodded gravely. They tricked you. Once you sign, they'll switch the documents. You'll become nothing more than a figurehead. They'll own everything. Ethan's hand curled into a fist against the table. 15 years of sweat, sacrifice, and relentless ambition, stolen by a single forged clause. And there's more, Isabella said, sliding another paper toward him. It was a bank statement. Ethan's eyes locked on the name. Adrian Vega, a transfer of $15 million, directly from Cole Technologies' corporate account into Adrian's personal account. The memo read simply, consulting fees. Ethan's breath caught, his vision blurred with rage. 15 million, he muttered. Payment, Isabella confirmed. He's already profited from betraying you. Memories surged through Ethan's mind, Adrian sleeping on his couch when they were broke, Adrian coding through the night while Ethan pitched investors. For 15 years, Ethan Cole and Adrian Vega had been more than business partners. They were brothers in every way that mattered. They built Cole Technologies from a broken-down garage, surviving off stale coffee and sleepless nights, chasing a dream no one believed in but them. And now that dream was stained with betrayal. 15 years, Ethan whispered bitterly, for 15 million. Isabella's gaze softened, but her words were steady. I know it hurts. But you can't ignore this. If you had signed today, by tomorrow you'd be powerless. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of betrayal pressing down harder than any market collapse. Ethan rose, locking the documents in his safe, and looked out at the glittering city below. For the first time in his career, he wasn't fighting competitors or market trends. He was fighting betrayal from the man he trusted most, and tomorrow would decide everything. The next morning came too soon. Ethan Cole hadn't slept. He sat in silence as dawn painted the city skyline in cold shades of silver, his mind replaying every word Isabella Morales had said the night before. He trusted no one now. Not Adrian, not Serena, not even himself. But one question refused to leave his thoughts. Who exactly was Isabella Morales? When he arrived at Cole Technologies, the building was nearly empty. Only the hum of early cleaners echoed down the marble hallways. Ethan didn't go to his office. Instead, he walked straight into human resources. The HR manager, startled to see him so early, stammered a greeting. "Mr. Cole, good morning, sir." "I need a file," Ethan said, his tone steady. "Employee records, Isabella Morales." The man blinked. "The cleaning staff?" "That's right." 5 minutes later, a thick manila folder sat on Ethan's desk. He opened it carefully, expecting to find routine information, timesheets, emergency contacts, hourly pay slips. But as he flipped through the pages, his expression darkened. Bachelor's degree in international business, master's in finance, top 5% of her class, former senior analyst at McKinsey Global Consulting. He froze. McKinsey. That name meant something. A titan in the corporate world, known for its ruthless precision and impossible hiring standards. Isabella Morales had no business scrubbing floors. He kept reading. Her last performance evaluation glowed with praise. An exceptional talent with a rare strategic mind. Yet just months later, a handwritten note followed, resigned voluntarily. But Ethan knew the tone. It wasn't voluntary, it was corporate speak, for we pushed her out. He closed the file slowly, his thoughts racing. Later that morning, when Isabella arrived to start her shift, she found Ethan waiting near the service elevator. He didn't speak at first, only motioned for her to follow him. Inside his private office, the atmosphere was tense. The city stretched behind them like a wall of glass and power. Ethan dropped the folder on the table. "McKinsey Global," he said quietly. "Master's in finance, top of your class. You worked there for 2 years. Her posture stiffened. "You went through my file." "I did," Ethan said, "because I need to know who I'm trusting." "Why are you here, Isabella? Why would someone with your background take a janitor's job?" She hesitated, eyes darting to the door, as if considering escape. Then she looked back at him, her voice calm but tinged with exhaustion. "Because it doesn't matter," she said bitterly. "It doesn't matter how many degrees I have or what I've achieved. To everyone here, I'm just the Latina cleaning lady." Ethan frowned. "That can't be the whole story." Isabella gave a hollow laugh. "No, it's not. You want the truth?" "I worked at McKinsey for 2 years. I was good at it, really good. When clients panicked, I calmed them. When deals went wrong, I fixed them. I earned results. But when it came time for promotions, there was always a reason I wasn't chosen." She looked up, her eyes glistening. "First, they said I needed more experience. Then they said my communication style didn't fit the company culture. Translation, I was too competent for my position. But I didn't look like their version of a leader." Ethan listened quietly, his jaw tightening. "That's discrimination." "You could call it that," Isabella said with a humorless smile. "But how do you fight giants like McKinsey? With what money? With what lawyer? Who would believe a Latina over a billion-dollar firm?" Her bitterness was raw, the kind that comes from wounds long hidden. Ethan said nothing. He couldn't. The injustice sat heavy in the room, louder than words. "And your family?" he asked gently. "You mentioned someone, a sister?" Isabella nodded slowly. "Maria, she's 22, born with a congenital heart defect. We've been saving for her surgery for years. $200,000 we'll never have. When Mackenzie asked me to resign, I lost everything. Salary, health insurance, stability. I took whatever job I could find. This one covers part of Maria's treatment. It's not glamorous, but it helps her get her medication." She swallowed hard, her voice trembling just slightly. "That's why I'm here. Not because I wanted to be invisible, but because I couldn't afford not to be." Ethan's chest tightened. Here she was, a woman who should have been sitting across from him in a board meeting, not polishing his floors. A woman whose brilliance had been buried under prejudice and survival. He walked to the window, staring at the reflection of the city in the glass. "They threw away a mind like yours," he said quietly. "And now the people I trusted are trying to do the same to me." Isabella looked at him, her voice soft but resolute. "Then don't let them. You have power, Ethan. Use it while you still can. He turned back to her, the flicker of resolve returning to his eyes. You said last night you could find more proof, something concrete, something that could bury them for good. Can you still do that? Isabella nodded. Yes, but I'll need access to Adrian's private network, his emails, his transaction logs. Ethan considered it, then said, You'll have it, whatever you need. Their eyes met, two people from opposite worlds, united by the same wound, betrayal. For the first time, Ethan didn't just see a cleaning lady. He saw a fighter, someone who'd been burned by the same kind of corruption that now threatened his empire. And in that quiet office, among the glass towers and unspoken truths, an unlikely alliance was born. That night, the city hummed with quiet danger. Cole Technologies' offices stood mostly empty, but in the dim glow of the 23rd floor, Isabella Morales wasn't cleaning. She was searching. Ethan had given her a small access card, one that could unlock Adrian Vega's restricted drive. He had told her to wait until everyone was gone, but sometimes evil doesn't wait to sleep. As she crouched behind a column near the executive wing, the sound of laughter echoed down the hallway, and sharp, familiar, wrong. It was them, Adrian Vega and Serena Delgado. Isabella froze, clutching her cleaning cart like a shield. She'd seen them together before, whispering after meetings, but tonight their voices carried something darker, urgency. Do you realize how close she came to ruining everything? Serena hissed. Her heels clicked angrily on the marble floor. That cleaning girl, what's her name? Isabella? Adrian's tone was calm, but the edge in his voice was unmistakable. I know. She's been snooping. David's hesitating because of her. If she talks, everything collapses. Isabella's pulse quickened. They knew. I told you, Serena continued. We should have dealt with her the moment she started hanging around the executive floor. People like her are dangerous. They see too much and don't know when to stay quiet. Adrian exhaled through his teeth. Relax. I already have a plan. Plan? Serena's laugh was cold. You mean another delay? She's still inside the building, Adrian. Do you want her to record you confessing next? That's when Adrian's voice dropped, dark and deliberate. Tomorrow morning, security will find something missing. A watch, a prototype tablet, maybe even petty cash. Enough to make her look guilty. She'll be escorted out, fired on the spot. If she resists, I'll have legal send her a cease and desist for defamation. Serena stopped walking. You're going to frame her? Adrian smirked. Call it protecting our interests. Once she's gone, David will have no reason to doubt the merger, and Sterling will finally belong to us. Serena hesitated. You're playing with fire, Adrian. I always have, he replied coolly. And that girl, she's not fire. She's smoke. And tomorrow, I'll make sure it disappears. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. The world seemed to tilt under her feet. Every instinct screamed for her to run, to get out of that hallway before they saw her. She backed away slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. But as she turned, her elbow brushed against a metal cart. It rattled loudly. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Adrian's voice snapped to attention. What was that? Panic surged through Isabella. She darted down the service corridor, slipping through the side door, just as Adrian appeared at the far end of the hall. Who's there? He barked. The lights flickered. Isabella pressed herself against the wall, hidden behind the heavy janitorial closet door. Her breath came in shallow bursts. Through the narrow gap, she saw Adrian's silhouette pacing down the hallway, eyes scanning every corner. Nothing. Silence. After a long moment, his footsteps faded. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime. Isabella stayed frozen for another full minute before finally exhaling. Her hands trembled. She knew she couldn't stay here. Not now. Not after what she'd just heard. She slipped out of the building through the loading dock, the cold night air biting her skin. The city lights blurred in her vision as she ran down the quiet street, clutching her phone. When she finally stopped, she ducked behind a parked car and opened her recorder app. Her voice shook. They know. Adrian Vega and Serena Delgado. They're planning to frame me for theft tomorrow morning to silence me. I need to warn Mr. Cole before it's too late. Her thumb hovered over the send button, but then she hesitated. What if Ethan didn't believe her this time? What if Adrian got to him first? She couldn't risk it. Not without proof. That's when she made her decision. She would go back. Not tonight, but before dawn. She'd find the emails, the transfers, the digital records that tied Adrian and Serena to Sterling. It was the only way to protect herself. And Ethan. But as she started walking toward the subway, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was already being followed. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the office early again, unaware of the storm waiting to break. When he reached his desk, 2 security officers were already standing outside his door. "Sir," one of them said cautiously, "Mr. Vega asked us to check the storage area. Something valuable seems to be missing." Ethan frowned. "Missing? What are you talking about?" Before they could answer, the elevator chimed, and Adrian Vega stepped out, holding a small velvet box in his hand. His expression was a perfect mask of disappointment. "I'm sorry to bring this to your attention so early," Adrian said, his voice calm and measured. "But my watch, the custom Audemars Piguet, went missing from my office last night. Security reviewed the footage." He paused just long enough to let the silence stretch. "And it seems Isabella Morales was the last person seen entering the executive floor." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. Meanwhile, across town, Isabella was already on her way back, tired, anxious, clutching a flash drive she had managed to extract from a forgotten server before leaving last night. She didn't know that while she was racing to save the truth, the lie had already begun to spread, and in just a few hours, everything, her job, her safety, her life, would be on the line. The tension inside Cole Technologies could be felt like static in the air. Employees whispered in corridors, glancing nervously toward the executive floor. No one knew exactly what was happening, only that Adrian Vega had called an emergency meeting for 9 o'clock a.m. sharp. Rumors spread fast. Some said there'd been a data breach. Others whispered about missing equipment, but the word that traveled fastest was spy. By the time the staff gathered in the glass-walled auditorium, the atmosphere was thick with unease. Ethan Cole stood near the back, his arms crossed, silent, scanning the faces around him. Adrian stood at the podium, flanked by Serena Delgado and 2 members of the legal department. He was calm, composed, too composed, a predator who already knew the ending of his story. "Good morning, everyone," Adrian began, his voice carrying easily through the speakers. "I called this meeting because we're facing a serious internal threat. As many of you know, we're preparing for one of the most critical mergers in this company's history, but it seems not everyone here wants us to succeed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ethan's brow furrowed. Adrian paused, letting the suspense settle. "Last night, our security team discovered unauthorized access to confidential servers. Key files were copied, and one of our executive offices was entered after hours." He glanced toward Ethan briefly before continuing. "At first, I thought it was an external breach, but the security footage told a different story." Behind him, the large screen flickered to life. Grainy security footage played onto a dimly lit hallway, a woman's silhouette pushing a cleaning cart near the executive suite. Her badge flashed under the light. It was Isabella Morales. Gasps filled the room. Ethan's stomach dropped. Adrian clasped his hands behind his back, feigning sorrow. "This is not easy for me. I personally believe in second chances. But when someone violates our trust, when they endanger the livelihoods of every person in this room, there must be consequences." He gestured toward the security guards by the door. "Bring her in." The doors opened. Isabella stood there, pale, quiet, eyes wide but unflinching. 2 guards flanked her, though she wasn't resisting. Her uniform looked rumpled, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched the strap of her bag. Adrian smiled thinly. "Miss Morales, perhaps you can explain why you were in the executive area after midnight, accessing restricted files?" The crowd turned to her, whispering. "I wasn't stealing," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I was cleaning like always. I saw something suspicious in Mr. Vega's office, files that didn't belong to this company." A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd again. Adrian's expression hardened. "Oh, so now you're accusing me?" he asked, mock amusement dripping from every word. "That's bold. You break into executive systems and now you're claiming you were, what, investigating corruption?" Isabella met his gaze. "I know what you're doing with Sterling. I have proof. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed Adrian's face, but he quickly recovered, laughing lightly for the audience. Proof from the cleaning staff? That's cute. The laughter from a few employees stung the air like poison. Ethan clenched his fists. Something about this didn't feel right. He'd seen the footage. Yes, Isabella had been there, but the timestamps didn't match the server logs he'd reviewed earlier that morning. Adrian kept going, turning the humiliation into theater. You see, everyone, this is what happens when we let outsiders into our family. She's been leaking information to competitors, possibly even Sterling themselves. That's a lie, Isabella shouted, stepping forward. You're the one. Enough, Adrian snapped. You're done here. The guards moved closer, but Ethan stepped out from the crowd. Wait, the room fell silent. Adrian looked startled for just a moment before masking it. Ethan, you don't have to involve yourself. HR will handle... I said wait, Ethan repeated, his voice steady but sharp. Before you drag her out of here, show us the rest of that footage. Adrian blinked. Excuse me. The footage, Ethan said. Show all of it. From 11 o'clock p.m. to 2 o'clock a.m. If she accessed my floor, then I want to see when she left. Adrian hesitated, a small crack in his perfect composure. She deleted it, Serena interjected quickly. The logs are corrupted. Ethan turned toward her. Convenient. The audience shifted uneasily. Adrian's jaw tightened. Ethan, this isn't about your employee. It's about corporate security. Ethan's eyes burned into his old friends. Funny, because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like a witch hunt. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that makes people question what they're seeing. Adrian forced a smile. If you're implying I fabricated evidence, I'm saying, Ethan interrupted coldly, if you're wrong and you're destroying an innocent person's life in front of all these witnesses, then you're the one who should be worried about the consequences. The air snapped with tension. For a moment, no one moved. Then Adrian turned to the guards, his tone icy. Take her out. Isabella was led toward the door, but as she passed Ethan, she stopped, just for a second, and whispered, check the flash drive in my locker. It's all there. Ethan's heart pounded. He gave a slight nod, and as the doors closed behind her, he knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The damage was already spreading. Cole Technologies' reputation, once spotless, was now under attack from within. Whispers had turned into headlines. Internal espionage scandal at Cole Technologies. CEO's cleaning staff caught leaking corporate secrets. Ethan Cole stared at the news on his screen, jaw tight. The image attached to the article made his stomach turn. A photo of Isabella Morales standing beside a stack of confidential folders in what looked like Adrian Vega's office. Except Ethan knew one thing. That image wasn't real. An hour later, Adrian called another meeting. Smaller this time, limited to executives and key shareholders. The tension in the boardroom was suffocating. Adrian entered with a confidence that made Ethan's blood boil. He carried a sleek leather portfolio and a flash drive, his demeanor calm, polished, perfectly rehearsed. Serena sat beside him, a picture of sympathy in designer silk. Before we begin, Adrian said smoothly, I want to clarify unfortunate events that happened. It's important we all see the full picture. He connected the flash drive to the screen. Dozens of documents appeared. Screenshots of emails, financial transactions, and photographs. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The emails looked like they'd been sent from Isabella's account, detailing fake payments and instructions to transfer data to Sterling Corporation. Each message was time-stamped, signed, and aligned perfectly to Adrian's narrative. And then came the photos. Isabella meeting with a man in a cafe, sliding a USB across the table. Her contact, Adrian said, pointing at the projection. One of Sterling's senior analysts. We've confirmed his identity. The evidence speaks for itself. Ethan's heart pounded. The photos were convincing. Too convincing. The light, the angles, the expressions, and all engineered for one purpose. Destruction. Someone whispered, My God, she really did it. Adrian clasped his hands together, sighing as if in pain. I take no pleasure in this, but the board needs assurance that we are acting decisively. The merger cannot proceed under this kind of threat. Serena added softly, We all trusted her. I even defended her when rumors started. But betrayal often comes from the places we least expect. Her tone was perfect, gentle, wounded, believable. The performance of a lifetime. Ethan remained silent, eyes locked on the screen. When the slideshow ended, Adrian turned to him. "Ethan," he said, his voice careful, respectful. "You were close to her. I understand this must be difficult, but we can't afford hesitation. I'm recommending immediate legal action. Theft of intellectual property, breach of confidentiality, and espionage." Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward Ethan. He didn't answer right away. His mind replayed everything: the recordings, the late-night hallway, Isabella's terrified whisper, "They're planning to frame me." Now it was happening exactly as she said. But still, what if she had made a mistake? What if she'd acted alone, trying to help but crossing lines she didn't understand? Adrian leaned closer. "Ethan, this company's future depends on swift leadership. We can't show weakness now." Ethan's jaw tightened. He stood slowly, walking toward the screen. "Tell me something, Adrian," he said quietly. "If she was a spy, why would she stay after being caught in the footage? Why come to work this morning instead of disappearing with the data?" Adrian didn't flinch. "Because she's smart enough to act innocent. It's what manipulators do." Ethan's eyes flicked toward the documents again. The timestamps. Something about them bothered him. One email supposedly sent at 11:47 p.m. But at that exact time, he remembered seeing Isabella's badge log out of the building. He'd checked the security logs himself. Still, he couldn't prove anything. Not yet. "Until we have verifiable forensics," Ethan said finally, "we will not issue any public statement." Adrian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Ethan, the press already knows. Delaying makes us look complicit." Ethan turned to face him fully, voice firm. "Then let them speculate. I won't destroy someone's life based on unverified screenshots." For a brief moment, silence filled the room. Adrian's mask of control cracked just enough to reveal a flash of irritation before he quickly smoothed it over. "Of course," he said evenly. "You're the CEO. The decision is yours." When the meeting ended, Ethan returned to his office and locked the door. He dropped into his chair, staring at the fake images still burning in his mind. He picked up the flash drive Isabella had left him and inserted it into his computer. Dozens of encrypted files loaded slowly, their titles written in code. He opened the first one, a series of transaction records between Sterling Corporation and an offshore account. The recipient, Adrian Vega. Ethan's hands trembled. The amounts were staggering. $15 million. There it was, the real truth. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "They're not just framing her, they're erasing her. Be careful who you trust." No signature. But Ethan didn't need one. He looked out at the skyline, the city glowing under the weight of lies. Adrian had crossed a line. And soon, Ethan would too. He whispered under his breath, "Hold on, Isabella. I'm going to fix this." That night, as the offices emptied, Adrian sat alone in his corner suite, swirling a glass of whiskey. Serena stood by the window, her reflection sharp against the glass. "Do you think he suspects?" she asked quietly. Adrian smirked. "Of course he does. But suspicion without proof is just paranoia." He raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the city lights. By the time Ethan finds what he's looking for, it'll already be too late. As for Isabella, when the official email arrived, she already knew what it would say. "Effective immediately, your employment at Cole Technologies has been terminated. Please return all company property to the Human Resources Department before 5 p.m. No explanation, no hearing, no chance to defend herself. Just like that, her job, her dignity, and her sister's lifeline were gone. She sat frozen in the break room, still wearing her uniform. Around her, the whispers had already started. People she'd worked beside for months avoided her gaze, pretending to be busy. The ones who dared to look only offered pity, or worse, relief that it wasn't them. When the security guard appeared, he didn't look angry, just uncomfortable. "Miss Morales," he said quietly, "I have to escort you out." Her throat tightened. "Can I at least grab my things?" He nodded, gently. "Of course." They walked through the polished glass corridors she used to clean every night. The hallways that once held laughter and small kindnesses now felt hostile, foreign. On every wall, she saw framed photographs of Ethan Cole and Adrian Vega, the faces of men who built an empire. But only one of them had believed in her. And now, even he was silent. In the locker room, Isabella packed slowly, a few personal items, a small notebook filled with notes from the nights she'd gathered evidence, and a framed photo of her sister Maria, smiling, fragile, hooked to hospital monitors. She traced a thumb over the glass. "I'm sorry, Maria," she whispered. As she zipped up her bag, she heard footsteps behind her. When she turned, Serena Delgado was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I just wanted to say," Serena began, her tone sugar-coated, "no hard feelings. Things like this happen. Wrong place, wrong time, you know?" Isabella said nothing. Serena walked closer, her heels clicking on the tiles. "Honestly, I admire your courage. Going up against men like Adrian and Ethan, that takes guts. Shame it didn't work out." "Don't," Isabella said quietly. Serena tilted her head. "Don't what?" "Pretend you care," Isabella replied, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You're part of this. You and Adrian. You framed me." Serena's smirk faded for just a second. Then she laughed softly. "You really think anyone's going to believe that? A janitor accusing a CEO and his fiancée?" She leaned in close, her perfume sharp and expensive. "You should focus on your sister instead of chasing ghosts." Something in Isabella broke. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to fight back, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she turned away, clutching her bag. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice trembling. "Both of you will." Serena's smile widened. "Oh, sweetheart, I already don't." Outside, the wind was sharp, biting through her thin jacket. She stepped out of the revolving doors, watching as the building's mirrored surface reflected the sky, cold, gray, unfeeling. For the first time since she started there, the security badge around her neck no longer meant anything. She pulled it off and dropped it into the trash can by the door. Her phone buzzed, a reminder from the hospital. "Maria Morales, medication refill due today. Payment required upon pickup." The number on the screen blurred through her tears. She couldn't afford it now. No job meant no insurance, and no insurance meant no surgery. She sat on a bench across the street, head buried in her hands. Everything she'd fought for, every risk she'd taken, had only made things worse. But then she remembered Ethan's face during the meeting, the doubt in his eyes, the hesitation. He hadn't spoken against her, but he hadn't joined Adrian's attack either. Maybe he didn't believe the lies. Maybe there was still hope. That evening, as the city lights came alive, Isabella returned to her tiny apartment on the south side. Maria was sitting on the couch, thin and pale, flipping through an old magazine. "Hey," Maria said, smiling weakly. "You're home early." Isabella tried to smile back, but the words wouldn't come. Maria frowned. "Izzy, what's wrong?" Isabella sank beside her, pulling her into a hug. "It's nothing, baby. Just a rough day." Maria leaned against her shoulder. "You always say that, but this time, it feels different." Silence. Finally, Isabella whispered, "I lost my job." Maria's breath hitched. "What? But your insurance?" "I'll figure it out," Isabella said quickly, brushing away her sister's tears even as her own began to fall. "I'll find something else, I promise." But deep down, she didn't believe it. Not yet. Maria's small hand gripped hers tightly. "You always fix everything." "You will this time too." Isabella closed her eyes, letting the quiet strength of that faith sink into her bones. Maybe she couldn't fix everything, but she could fight, and she would. Later that night, as the world outside went quiet, Isabella opened her notebook and spread the flash drive Ethan had given back to her across the table. She had nothing left to lose now. No job, no reputation, no safety net. Just the truth. And a sister to fight for. She whispered to herself, steady and sure, if they want war, they'll have it. And with that, she opened her laptop and began to plan. For the first time, Ethan Cole didn't walk into his office. He slipped quietly into the hospital. He wore no tailored suit, no air of command, just a simple jacket, dark jeans, and the look of a man who'd been carrying the weight of a secret too long. In his pocket was a small check, $200,000, enough to cover one heart surgery. Enough to give a young woman named Maria Morales a second chance at life. And no one would ever know it came from him. It had been 3 days since Isabella was fired. 3 days of sleepless nights, replaying every moment, every lie Adrian and Serena had spun. He'd watched her walk out of the building, broken but proud, and something inside him had cracked. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who believed in destiny, but ever since that night she'd whispered, "Don't sign the contract." Fate seemed to keep throwing her into his path, as if testing what kind of man he truly was. When he learned about her sister, the illness, the impossible cost of surgery, he didn't hesitate. He called his lawyer and said, "Set up a private foundation, anonymous, no trace back to me." The lawyer had raised an eyebrow. $200,000? For someone you barely know? Ethan's voice was calm, but his eyes said everything. "She saved me from signing away my company. The least I can do is help her save her sister." At the hospital, the corridors smelled faintly of disinfectant and hope. Nurses rushed past him, pushing carts and wheelchairs. Somewhere down the hall, a young woman's laughter echoed faintly, fragile but alive. Ethan stopped outside a small patient room. Through the glass, he saw her, Maria Morales. Her skin was pale, but her eyes sparkled with a quiet strength. Beside her sat Isabella, her hands gently adjusting the blanket, whispering something that made her sister smile. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. He just stood there, watching the two of them, a bond stronger than any contract, more powerful than any fortune. A nurse walked by and paused. "You here for the Morales girl?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Just checking in." "Well," the nurse said with a smile, "you just missed the doctor. The surgery's approved, paid in full through a donor fund. The family doesn't even know who it came from, but whoever did it, they saved her life." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's good news." "It's more than good," the nurse said. "It's a miracle." Inside the room, Isabella held Maria's hand as tears shimmered in her eyes. "They said some anonymous donor covered everything," she whispered, voice trembling. "The surgery, the medications, even recovery. Maria, you're going to be okay." Maria looked up at her sister with confusion. "But who would do that?" Isabella shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe someone kind. Maybe someone who still believes in us." Maria smiled faintly. "You mean like Dad used to say, angels wear human faces?" Isabella laughed softly, tears falling. "Yeah, maybe like that." Outside the glass, Ethan turned away, unable to watch anymore. His chest ached, but it wasn't sadness. It was something quieter, something purer. He didn't want credit. He didn't want thanks. He just wanted her sister to live. That evening, as the city lights flickered on, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse, staring out across the skyline. His phone buzzed with messages from Adrian, about quarterly reports, about Sterling, about the merger. Ethan was now stalling again. He ignored every one of them. Instead, he opened his laptop and logged into a private server, one only he and his legal counsel knew existed. The same flash drive Isabella had given him was still there, filled with encrypted files she risked everything to expose. He typed slowly, "Project Phoenix." It wasn't the name of the merger anymore. It was the name of something new, his plan to take it all back. But before he began, he clicked open one last email, a message drafted but never sent, addressed to Isabella Morales. "You were right about everything, and I was too blind to see it. I'm sorry for what they did to you, for what I didn't stop. Your sister's surgery, it's taken care of. You don't owe me anything. Just don't stop fighting." His fingers hovered over the send button for a long time. Then he deleted the message instead. Some things were better left unsaid. Across town, Isabella sat by Maria's bedside, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her sister's breathing. The machines beeped softly, steady, strong, alive. She didn't know who had saved them. She didn't know that the man she'd once thought was just another billionaire, proud, unreachable, was quietly rebuilding everything she had lost. All she knew was that for the first time in months, there was hope. She whispered to her sister, "Whoever you are, thank you." And somewhere, miles away, Ethan Cole closed his eyes, letting the city's hum fill the silence. He didn't need her gratitude. Her peace was enough. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Adrian's lies still poisoned the company. The truth was still buried. And soon, when the moment came, Ethan would rise again. But not as the betrayed friend. Not as the CEO. As the man Isabella Morales had unknowingly awakened. A man who finally remembered what it meant to fight for what's right. Rain swept across the city that night. The kind that blurred lights and turned every reflection into a ghost. Ethan Cole stood alone in a quiet cafe on the east side of Manhattan, far from the glass towers and boardrooms that had once defined his life. He hadn't been here in years. The place was small, worn down, with a faint smell of roasted beans and rain-soaked asphalt. At exactly 9 p.m., the bell above the door rang. Isabella Morales walked in. She wasn't wearing her janitor's uniform anymore. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her coat plain but elegant, and there was something different in her eyes. No longer fear, but fire. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence between them. Finally, Ethan broke it. "You look stronger." She gave a small, tired smile. "You look worse." He laughed softly, the first real laugh in months. "I probably deserve that." She sat across from him, her hands resting on the table. "You wanted to see me?" "I did," Ethan said, "because I think it's time we take back what they stole from us." Isabella's gaze sharpened. "Us?" "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "You warned me when no one else would. You lost your job, your reputation, everything, because you tried to stop them. I can't undo what happened, but I can make it right." He slid a small flash drive across the table. "This is everything I've gathered over the last week. Financial records, falsified contracts, hidden accounts, all tied to Adrian Vega and Serena Delgado." Isabella looked at it but didn't touch it. "How did you get this?" "I own the company," Ethan said simply. "You'd be surprised how many doors that still opens." A small flicker of admiration crossed her face. "And what do you plan to do with it?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Expose them. At the next board meeting, in front of every shareholder, every executive, every journalist who still believes in this company. But I can't do it alone." "Why me?" she asked. "You already have the proof." "Because proof isn't enough," Ethan said. "They'll twist it like they did before. They'll call it fake, say I'm covering for myself." "But you were there, Isabella. You heard them. You saw everything they did, and the board will believe you. Not because of who you are, but because of what you've endured." Isabella hesitated. "You're asking me to walk back into the same place that destroyed me." "I'm asking you to help destroy the people who deserve it," he replied. Her eyes searched his for a long moment, and then she sighed. "When?" "Tomorrow morning," Ethan said. 10 a.m., sharp. They think I'm finally going to sign the merger. They'll all be there. Adrian, Serena, Sterling's reps, the press. I'll start the meeting. "You'll walk in at the exact moment I need you to." She raised an eyebrow. "And how will I know when that is?" He smiled faintly. "You'll know." For a while they sat in silence, two conspirators bound not by power but by survival. The rain outside softened to a drizzle. Finally, Isabella said quietly, "Maria's surgery went well. The doctors say she's going to recover fully." Ethan nodded, a trace of relief flickering in his eyes. "That's good news." "She still doesn't know who paid for it," Isabella continued. "But I think I do." Ethan froze, his hand tightening around his coffee cup. Isabella gave a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to admit it. I just wanted to say thank you." He looked up at her, eyes soft. "Don't thank me. Just make sure what we do next counts." She nodded. The next morning the sky cleared, the city reborn in light after a night of rain. But inside Cole Technologies the storm was just beginning. The boardroom felt like a pressure chamber, glass walls, cold air, and the sound of whispers barely contained behind polite smiles. Cameras flashed from the corner where a few invited journalists waited, ready to document the historic merger announcement. But no one in that room knew what was about to unfold. Ethan Cole stood tall at the head of the table, composed but alert. To his right sat Adrian Vega, polished, charming, venom behind the smile. Beside him, Serena Delgado leaned back, crossing her legs, confidence radiating like perfume. Ethan looked around at the faces of the board, men and women who'd once trusted him, now watching the three of them like predators circling a wounded animal. "Before we finalize the merger," Adrian said smoothly, "I think it's time to toast to new beginnings." Ethan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're right, Adrian. But before that, there's one thing we need to address." But Adrian cut him off, voice dripping with false sympathy. "Actually, Ethan, I think it's time we address something first." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Go ahead." Adrian stood, pressing a button on his tablet. The large screen behind them flickered to life, displaying financial statements, transaction screenshots, and bank logs. At first glance, they looked familiar, accounts Ethan recognized. But then he saw it. Large sums transferred from Cole Technologies' main fund to an account labeled Morales Medical Foundation. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Serena rose smoothly, her tone perfectly measured. "We recently uncovered a disturbing pattern, Mr. Cole. Company money being redirected to a private fund, one that just so happens to cover a $200,000 heart surgery for the sister of a former employee." She paused, letting the tension settle. That employee being Isabella Morales. Gasps echoed through the room. Ethan's heart pounded. Adrian clasped his hands, pretending to look pained. "We all know how dedicated you are to your staff, Ethan, but this crosses a line. Using company money to support a personal relationship, that's not charity, that's embezzlement." The accusation hit like a knife. Ethan took a slow breath. "That's a lie." Adrian feigned surprise. "A lie? The transfers are right there, dated, signed, your digital authorization code." Ethan stepped forward. "I never approved those payments. The money came from my personal account. You know that." Serena folded her arms. "So you're admitting the relationship then?" She smiled, all charm and poison. "You paid for her sister's surgery. You've been meeting her secretly. You risked your career to protect her. That's not philanthropy, that's favoritism. Or worse, an affair." The room went dead silent. For a moment, Ethan just stared at them, stunned by how far they were willing to go. Then quietly he said, "You forged this." Adrian chuckled. "Oh, come on, Ethan. Are you really going to play the victim now? We've all seen how close you and Miss Morales have become. Late-night meetings, special treatment, her sudden access to confidential files." Serena leaned in. "It's touching, really. The billionaire and the cleaning lady, a modern tragedy." Ethan's voice turned to steel. "You disgust me." "Maybe," Adrian said, smiling coldly, "but I still own 51% of the board's trust right now, and all they see is a man caught with his hand in the company's wallet." A board member cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, these are serious allegations. If true, it could constitute grounds for removal as CEO." Ethan turned toward them, his calm returning. "Then let me remind you all, this is the same man who falsified contracts, stole millions through offshore accounts, and nearly handed our company to Sterling. And now, when he's cornered, he invents another lie." He glanced at Adrian. "You've always underestimated me. But you made one mistake. You assumed I'd come here unprepared." The door opened. Every head turned. Isabella Morales stepped inside, holding a folder in her hand. The tension in the room snapped like glass. Adrian's smile faltered. "You don't belong here." Ethan's voice cut through him. "She belongs here more than you ever did." Isabella walked straight to the front of the room and laid the folder on the table. "These are the original financial reports," she said. "Unaltered. Pulled from the internal audit system before Mr. Vega deleted the evidence." Gasps filled the air again. She connected a USB drive to the projector. Numbers, signatures, and email trails appeared on the screen, all pointing to Adrian's secret accounts, not Ethan's. Silence hung over the boardroom like a storm that had forgotten to end. Adrian Vega sat motionless in his chair, face pale, eyes darting across the room as if searching for a way out. Serena Delgado sat beside him, her perfect composure cracking at the edges, fingers trembling as whispers filled the air. Ethan Cole stood at the head of the long mahogany table, the sunlight from the glass wall casting a golden halo around him, but his voice, when he spoke, was cold and deliberate. "You wanted truth," he said quietly. So here it is. He pressed a button on the console. The massive screen behind him lit up with a cascade of files, encrypted data, emails, voice logs, timestamps, each one linked to Adrian and Serena. The first document, Ethan said, is the original merger contract, the one I was supposed to sign 3 weeks ago. But as you'll notice, he zoomed in on the details, highlighting key paragraphs. The terms were altered. My 60% controlling share was changed to 20%. The edits were made from Adrian's device 3 hours before the final printing. Gasps rippled through the room. Ethan turned, his gaze steady. Next, the offshore transfers. $15 million wired from Sterling Corporation to Vega Holdings LLC. Same date, same signatures. The merger wasn't about growth. It was a heist. Serena's voice finally broke through the tension, sharp and defensive. That's not proof. Those files could be fabricated. Isabella Morales stepped forward before she could finish. Her presence commanded the room, quiet but fierce. They're not fabricated, Isabella said, placing a slim black folder on the table. They're verified copies from the company's backup server. The same one Adrian tried to wipe the night he framed me. Adrian slammed his palm on the table. You had no right. I had every right, Isabella shot back, her tone calm but razor-edged. You destroyed my career. You almost cost my sister her life. You used this company as your personal vault, and now everyone knows. Ethan looked at her, not as an employee, but as an equal. Then he turned back to the board. There's one last thing, he said, clicking the final file. The speakers came alive with the sound of a recorded conversation. Adrian's voice filled the room. Cold, calculated. We'll plant the money trail under Cole's name. Let the audit catch it later. He'll take the fall, and Sterling will take control. A beat of silence followed. Then Serena's voice chimed in, smug, self-assured. And the cleaning lady, she knows too much. Then we'll make her disappear, Adrian replied. The room erupted. Board members whispered in disbelief, some standing, others shaking their heads. One of them turned toward Adrian. You plotted against your own CEO? Against all of us? Adrian's mask shattered. No, it was her. He pointed at Serena, desperation clawing at his voice. She forged the documents. Serena laughed bitterly. Don't you dare blame me, Adrian. You're the one who took the money. You're the one who thought you could outsmart everyone. Their voices rose, colliding like knives. Ethan watched them, not with anger, but with a quiet, tired sadness. This, he said finally, is what greed looks like. This is what happens when power becomes more important than people. He looked at the board. You've all seen the evidence, the forged contracts, the illegal transfers, the recording. I won't tell you what to believe. The truth speaks for itself. The chairman, an older man with silver hair, stood slowly. Mr. Vega, Ms. Delgado, you are hereby suspended, pending criminal investigation. Security will escort you from the building immediately. 2 guards moved forward. Adrian tried to resist, shouting as they pulled him toward the door. You think this changes anything, Ethan? You'll never be clean. You're just like me. Ethan didn't flinch. That's where you're wrong. The doors closed behind them, leaving silence in their wake. A long moment passed before anyone spoke again. Then softly, one of the board members said, Mr. Cole, I owe you an apology. We all do. Ethan nodded, his expression calm but distant. You don't owe me anything. Just make sure this company never forgets what happened here. He turned toward Isabella, who had been standing quietly near the corner, watching it all unfold. Thank you, he said, for everything. She smiled faintly. I didn't do it for you. I did it for the truth. He smiled back. That's exactly why I needed you. Hours later, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Ethan stood by the window of his office. The city stretched out before him, vast, alive, unbroken. For the first time in months, it felt lighter. Isabella entered quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. They're gone, she said softly. Good, Ethan replied. Let the law handle the rest. She handed him a cup. So, what happens now? He looked at her for a long moment. Now, he said, smiling faintly, Now we rebuild. She raised an eyebrow. We? Ethan met her eyes, sincerity glinting behind his calm. This company needs people who remember what integrity feels like. I can't do that alone. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then Isabella nodded. Then let's start. They stood there, two people who had lost everything but found something stronger. Truth. Outside, the clouds parted and sunlight poured across the skyline. The storm was over, but their story was just beginning. The city woke up to breaking news that morning. Every major headline carried the same story. Vega and Delgado arrested in corporate fraud scandal. The once celebrated business duo, Adrian Vega and Serena Delgado, were now in handcuffs, escorted through flashing cameras and angry reporters. Their faces, once symbols of power and charm, were pale and hollow under the harsh morning light. Inside Cole Technologies' headquarters, the atmosphere was unlike anything the company had felt in months. Quiet but alive. There was relief in every hallway, every office, every whispered conversation. The nightmare had finally ended. Outside, a crowd was gathering near the main gate. Reporters shouted questions as police vehicles drove away with the two disgraced executives. Through the glass, Ethan and Isabella watched. "You think people will forgive them?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. They'll have to face what they did, in court and in themselves." He turned back to her. "But you deserve to be remembered for your courage." Isabella looked down, a hint of emotion in her voice. "All I did was tell the truth, and you risked everything doing it," Ethan said. "Most people would have walked away." She met his gaze. "Maybe I couldn't. Not when I saw how far they'd go, and not when I saw someone still willing to believe me." Their eyes held for a moment too long. The kind of silence that doesn't need words. Then the door opened, breaking the moment. It was the board chairman. "Mr. Cole," he said, "the press is waiting downstairs. They'd like a statement." Ethan nodded. "Tell them I'll be there in 10 minutes. As the door closed, Isabella looked at him curiously. "You're really going to talk to them?" "I have to," Ethan replied. "The company needs to hear the truth from someone who still believes in it." He reached for his jacket and straightened his tie, his composure returning. But now there was something different in his eyes. Determination. Peace. Ethan stepped onto the podium. Dozens of microphones pointed toward him. He took a breath, steady and controlled. "Cole Technologies has faced one of the darkest chapters in its history," he began. "People we trusted abused that trust. They stole, lied, and tried to destroy what so many of us built with integrity." He paused, glancing toward Isabella, who stood quietly at the back of the room. "But today," he continued, "we take the first step toward rebuilding. Not just a company, but a culture of honesty. What happened here isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about courage. The courage of those who chose to speak up when silence would have been easier." He looked directly into the cameras. "Justice isn't about revenge, it's about truth. And today, truth won." The room erupted in applause. Later that evening, when the noise had faded and the building was quiet again, Ethan found himself back on the rooftop terrace, the same place where he once doubted everything. Isabella joined him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You know," she said gently, "you were good out there." He smiled. "You think so?" "I know so." They stood side by side, watching the city lights shimmer below, a skyline that had witnessed greed, betrayal, and redemption, all within the same walls. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan turned to her, his voice quiet but certain. "You know, I think this company might finally have a future worth fighting for." She smiled. "Then let's make sure it does." The night wind carried their laughter softly across the rooftop. Two souls who had been broken by lies, now standing together in the light of justice. And for the first time in a long time, both of them believed again, not in power, not in wealth, but in what was right. The storm had finally passed. Cole Technologies, once on the edge of collapse, was alive again, steadier, stronger, and free from the shadows that had nearly destroyed it. But amidst the rebuilding, something quieter had begun to grow. something neither Ethan Cole nor Isabella Morales had expected. It started subtly. A shared smile in the hallway. Late nights spent going over new policies, drafting reforms, fixing what others had broken, and somewhere between endless cups of coffee and tired laughter, the air between them began to change. Ethan had always been a man of order. Sharp suits, sharper decisions, but now, every time Isabella walked into the room, that order faltered, just a little. One evening, long after most of the staff had gone home, the glow of city lights filled his office. Isabella was still there, seated across from him, with a stack of files. Her hair had fallen loose from its bun, strands framing her face as she leaned over the desk. "You know," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair, "you don't have to stay this late. You've done more than enough." She looked up, smiling softly. "Says the man who hasn't left this building since sunrise." He chuckled. "Touché." The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It was calm, comfortable. The kind of silence that feels like understanding. After a moment, Isabella closed the file and looked out the window. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd signed that contract?" Ethan followed her gaze. The skyline shimmered against the night, beautiful, distant, fragile. "Every day," he admitted, "I would have lost everything. The company, the people, maybe even myself." She turned toward him. "But you didn't." He smiled faintly. "Because someone stopped me." Her eyes met his, steady, brave, filled with quiet strength. "You stopped yourself, Ethan. I just gave you a reason to pause." For a second, neither of them looked away. The tension wasn't sharp or forced. It was tender, honest, the kind that carries unspoken gratitude, and something deeper underneath. In the following weeks, things began to change for both of them. Ethan led the company's renewal, building a culture centered on transparency and ethics. Isabella became one of his closest advisors, and not because of her title, but because he trusted her more than anyone else. And yet, even as they worked side by side, both of them knew there was more between them than strategy and schedules. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled softly outside, Isabella found herself standing in front of Ethan's office door, hesitating. Inside, he was staring at an old photograph, one of him and Adrian Vega, back when things were simpler. She knocked gently. "Come in." When he looked up, she saw the weariness in his eyes, the kind that no amount of success could erase. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, though it wasn't convincing. "Just thinking about how fast people change." "Or maybe," she said softly, "it's how slow we are to see who they really are." He looked at her, the weight in his expression easing slightly. "You always know exactly what to say." "Occupational hazard," she teased. "Years of cleaning up other people's messes." That made him laugh, really laugh, for the first time in weeks. It filled the room, light and genuine, cutting through the heaviness that had lingered for so long. When the laughter faded, Ethan leaned against the desk, watching her. "You know, Isabella, when all this began, I thought I was saving the company. But now I realize the company wasn't the one being saved." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He took a slow breath. "You reminded me what integrity looks like, what it means to believe in people again." For a moment, the sound of rain filled the silence between them. Then Isabella stepped closer. "You didn't need me to remind you, Ethan. That's who you've always been. You just forgot for a while." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. The distance between them seemed to disappear without either of them moving. His hand brushed against hers, hesitant, almost accidental, but she didn't pull away. "Isabella," he said quietly, "I don't want to lose what we've built, not just the company, this, whatever it is." She looked down at their joined hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then don't." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, real. Weeks turned into months. Together, they transformed Cole Technologies into something new. A company that no longer ran on fear or ego, but on trust. The employees followed their example, inspired by the partnership between a CEO and the woman who'd once been a janitor, the woman who changed everything. And yet, even with all the progress, Ethan never once forgot that night, the whisper that stopped his hand from signing a contract that would have destroyed him. Those words had saved more than a business. They'd saved his soul. The world had finally quieted down for Ethan Cole. Months had passed since justice was served. Cole Technologies was thriving again, stronger than ever. But the man behind it had changed. No longer the cold, calculating billionaire who lived by numbers and contracts. Now he was simply a man who had learned that integrity and love were worth more than any fortune. That's why, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Ethan found himself standing by the edge of Lake Michigan, hands in his pockets, heart pounding harder than it had during any business deal in his life. The city skyline shimmered behind him, bathed in the soft light of sunset. The water glistened gold, reflecting the colors of the sky, calm, endless, and full of promise. He took a deep breath, glancing at the small velvet box in his hand. Inside it was a diamond ring, elegant, understated, just like her. He smiled to himself. "You've closed billion-dollar mergers," he muttered, "but you're nervous about one question." Behind him, a soft voice called out, "Talking to yourself again, Mr. Cole?" He turned, and there she was, Isabella Morales. The woman who once swept his floors, who once risked everything to save him. Dressed in a simple cream coat and a scarf fluttering in the lake breeze, she looked radiant. Her smile, gentle and genuine, could have stopped time itself. Ethan felt his throat tighten slightly. "You're late," he teased. She raised an eyebrow. "You said 5 o'clock. It's 5:02. "Right," he said, trying to sound composed, but the nervous edge in his voice betrayed him. They walked together along the lakeshore, the sound of water lapping softly against the stones. For a moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. Their story was already written in everything around them. The calm after chaos, the peace after the storm. Finally, Isabella broke the silence. "You've been quiet all day," she said softly. "Is something wrong?" Ethan smiled faintly. "No, everything's finally right." He stopped walking. She turned to face him, confusion flickering in her eyes until she saw the small box in his hand. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. "Ethan," she whispered. He opened the box, revealing the ring. The diamond caught the last rays of the sun, scattering light like hope itself. "I've written 1,000 speeches in my life," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "But none of them ever mattered as much as this one." He took a step closer. "You saw me at my worst, when the people I trusted betrayed me, when I almost lost everything. And instead of walking away, you stood there. You told me the truth when no one else dared to. You didn't just save my company, Isabella. You saved me." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't have the words to thank you," Ethan continued, "but I have one question that might come close." He dropped to one knee, the golden light surrounding them like a scene from a dream. "Isabella Morales," he said, voice trembling just slightly, "will you marry me?" For a moment she didn't move, just stared at him, tears glistening on her cheeks, wind catching her hair. Then she laughed, a soft, breathless sound that carried pure joy. "Ethan," she whispered again, her voice shaking. "You really think I'd say no after everything we've been through?" He grinned. "So, that's a yes?" She nodded, laughing through her tears. "That's a yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, simple, timeless, just like their story. Ethan stood, and she threw her arms around him, the lake breeze swirling around them like music. For a long, endless moment, they just held each other. No words, no titles, no shadows of the past. Just two people who had fought for truth and found something even greater. A soft voice interrupted them. "I knew it!" They turned, and standing a few feet away was Maria, Isabella's younger sister, smiling through happy tears. She had her phone up, clearly recording everything. "I told you he was going to do it today," she laughed, running over to hug her sister. Isabella blushed. "Maria, you weren't supposed to—" Ethan chuckled. "You were in on this?" Maria winked. "Let's just say someone needed to make sure she actually showed up." Ethan shook his head, smiling warmly. "Thank you, Maria, for giving me the chance to meet your sister." Maria squeezed his arm. "Just promise me one thing. Don't ever make her cry again." He looked at Isabella and said softly, "Never again." The three of them stood there, the sun dipping lower behind the horizon, painting the sky in pink and gold. For once, everything felt still. Maria turned to them, grinning. "So when's the wedding?" Isabella laughed. "Let's just enjoy this moment first." Ethan smiled. "Yeah, for once I'm in no hurry." As night fell, city lights began to twinkle across the lake. Ethan and Isabella stood hand in hand, watching the water reflect the stars. He leaned closer, whispering, "You know, it all started with a whisper." She smiled, remembering that night, the one where she'd quietly warned him not to sign and unknowingly changed both their lives. "And it's ending with one, too," she whispered back. He kissed her forehead gently. "No," he said, smiling. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning." And as the waves lapped softly against the shore, the man who once had everything but felt empty finally found the one thing he never knew he needed. Love that was honest, fearless, and true. The kind of love born not in perfection, but in courage. Spring had finally come to Chicago. Lincoln Park was dressed in gold and green, cherry blossoms dancing in the wind, the lake shimmering under the soft afternoon sun. It was one of those rare days when the city itself seemed to smile. And today, it had a reason to. Because this was the day Ethan Cole was getting married. The once stoic billionaire who built an empire out of logic and numbers now stood under a flower-covered arch wearing a simple navy suit and the kind of nervous smile that only true love could bring. In front of him sat a small, intimate crowd, friends, colleagues, and a few familiar faces who had seen both his rise and his fall. But this wasn't a corporate event. There were no cameras, no headlines, no flashing lights, just people who mattered. The soft sound of a cello filled the air. And then she appeared, Isabella Morales, radiant in an elegant ivory gown that moved with the breeze. Her hair was loose, her eyes bright. She didn't wear diamonds or pearls, just a delicate silver bracelet that had once belonged to her mother. Ethan couldn't breathe for a moment. Every step she took toward him felt like a lifetime collapsing into one perfect moment. From the night she whispered, "Don't sign that contract," to the battles they had fought side by side, to this, the beginning of something new. When she finally reached him, he took her hand. His voice trembled as he whispered, "You look incredible." She smiled. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. Cole." The guests laughed softly. Even in this grand moment, they were still them. Grounded, honest, imperfectly perfect. The ceremony began, officiated by a longtime friend of Ethan's family, a quiet man with kind eyes. He spoke of love as a partnership, not a possession, of how two people could rebuild not just their own lives, but the lives of those around them, when love is rooted in truth. Ethan and Isabella listened, their fingers intertwined. When it was time for the vows, Ethan took a deep breath. "I used to believe success meant control," he said. "That every decision had to be calculated, every risk minimized. But then I met you, and everything I thought I knew about life changed." He looked into her eyes, the entire world fading around them. "You taught me that strength doesn't come from power, but from honesty. You showed me that even when everything falls apart, what matters most is who stands beside you. You are my partner, my truth, my home." Isabella's eyes glistened. Then she spoke, voice soft, steady, filled with emotion. "When I first met you, I thought you were untouchable, a man with everything but still alone. And maybe I was just the cleaning lady with a mop and a warning. But the truth is, we both needed saving." She paused, smiling through her tears. "You saved my sister. You gave me back my faith. And somewhere between board meetings and late-night coffee, I fell in love with the man who believed in second chances, not just for me, but for himself." Ethan's hand tightened around hers. The officiant smiled. "By the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The applause erupted. Ethan leaned in and kissed her, slow, tender, the kind of kiss that made the rest of the world disappear. Hours later, the park had transformed into a dreamlike reception. Fairy lights strung between trees, jazz music floating through the air. Guests laughed, danced, and toasted to a story that felt almost too good to be true. Maria, Isabella's sister, was beaming brighter than anyone. She clinked her glass and called out, "A toast to my sister, who once thought she'd never be seen, and to the man who saw her when no one else did." The crowd cheered. Isabella covered her face, laughing. Ethan raised his glass toward Maria. "And to you," he said, "for making sure she didn't run away today." Maria winked. "Oh, trust me, I almost did the running for her." Everyone laughed. The mood was pure joy, light, unpretentious, alive. Later that night, as the last of the guests drifted away, Ethan and Isabella walked hand in hand through the park. The city lights shimmered beyond the trees, and the air was cool and calm. "Do you realize," she said softly, "this is where you first told me you trusted me?" He smiled. "I remember. I also remember you telling me I was crazy." "You were," she teased. "Still are." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Maybe, but I'm your kind of crazy now." She laughed, that same laugh that had once brought him back from the edge of darkness. And then, as they stood there beneath the stars, he wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "You know what's funny?" "What?" "For a man who spent his life chasing growth and numbers, you're the best investment I've ever made." She rolled her eyes, smiling. "That's the most Ethan Cole thing you could possibly say." "Guilty," he said, "but I mean it." A few weeks later, the headlines told a new story, not of scandal, but of renewal. Cole Technologies surges 30% growth in 3 months, new leadership, new vision. Under Isabella's guidance as the new vice president, the company had reinvented itself. Employees felt inspired again. Partnerships were thriving, and for the first time in years, the company's culture was defined not by fear, but by hope. From janitor to executive, from betrayal to love, Isabella Morales had become the face of resilience. And beside her, Ethan Cole had finally found peace, not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, but as a husband, a believer, and a man forever changed by one simple whisper. That night, long after everyone had gone home, Ethan and Isabella danced one last time under the fading lights of Lincoln Park, barefoot, laughing, holding each other close. No audience, no cameras, just two hearts that had finally found their rhythm. And as the wind carried the sound of the city in the distance, Ethan whispered the words that started it all, the same ones that changed everything. "Don't sign it." She smiled, resting her head against his chest. "Too late," she said softly. "I already did." Morning sunlight poured gently through the windows of a high-rise apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. The city below was just waking up, taxis honking, waves whispering against the shore, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the room. Ethan Cole was standing by the window, sleeves rolled up, scrolling through a digital report on his tablet. He was still the same sharp businessman he had always been, but his gaze was softer now, his smile more effortless. Behind him, laughter floated from the kitchen. Isabella Morales Cole was humming quietly as she prepared breakfast, her hair tied loosely, her movements slow and serene. It had been nearly a year since their wedding in Lincoln Park. The chaos, the betrayals, the corporate battles, all of it felt like a lifetime ago. Now life was simpler, gentler, or so Ethan thought. "Ethan?" Isabella called from the kitchen. Her voice sounded a little nervous. "Can you come here for a second?" He looked up immediately. "Everything okay?" She nodded, maybe a little too quickly. "Yeah, just come here." When he walked in, she was standing by the counter, holding something small in her hands, a little white stick with 2 faint pink lines. For a moment, Ethan didn't understand. His mind, trained for numbers and logic, froze completely. Then realization dawned. "Wait, is that—" Isabella bit her lip, tears already forming in her eyes. 6 weeks. The words hung in the air, fragile and beautiful. Ethan blinked, still processing. 6 weeks? He stepped closer, as if afraid the moment might disappear if he moved too fast. "You mean you're—" She nodded, smiling through her tears. "We're going to be parents." For the first time in years, Ethan, the man who faced down billion-dollar crises and corporate betrayals, was speechless. Then he laughed, a deep, joyful, disbelieving laugh that filled the entire room. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off the ground as she laughed and cried at the same time. "You're serious?" he whispered. She nodded against his chest. "Completely." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "You just turned my whole world upside down again, you know that?" She smiled. "You say that like it's a bad thing." He kissed her forehead. "It's the best thing." Later that morning, they sat together on the couch, untouched coffee growing cold beside them, as they stared out over the glittering lake. Ethan still had his arm around her shoulders, and Isabella rested her head on his chest, her fingers absently tracing the buttons of his shirt. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think my life ended when the company nearly fell apart, when everything I'd built was slipping away. But it wasn't ending. It was just beginning." Isabella smiled faintly. "Life has a funny way of teaching us that, doesn't it?" He looked down at her. "You really think we're ready for this?" She laughed. "No one's ever ready, Ethan, but that's the beauty of it. We'll figure it out together, like we always do." He exhaled, the weight of her words sinking in. For so long, Ethan had defined his worth by his success. But now, staring at the woman who'd stood beside him through everything, and knowing that inside her was their child, he realized that his greatest legacy wouldn't be a company or a fortune. It would be this family. He leaned down, resting his forehead against hers. "You've already given me everything, Isabella. I don't know how to deserve any of it." "You don't have to deserve it," she whispered. "You just have to love it." A few days later, they went for a walk through the park, the same one where they had been married. The air smelled like spring again, the trees just beginning to bloom. Maria joined them for lunch, bringing a small bouquet of lilies for her sister. "You're glowing," Maria teased, hugging Isabella. "I knew something was up. You've been smiling too much lately." Ethan laughed. "Guess we're not very good at keeping secrets." Maria's expression softened. "I'm so happy for you both. You've been through hell and somehow turned it into something beautiful." Ethan looked at his wife, the woman who'd once been the invisible cleaning lady in his building, who had stood up against power and corruption, who had taught him that love was the most transformative force in the world. He squeezed her hand gently. "She's been doing that since the day I met her." Isabella smiled, her eyes glistening. "You mean since the day I ruined your merger?" He laughed. "Best sabotage of my life." That evening, as the sun set over the lake, they sat together on a park bench, the world painted in gold. Ethan rested his hand lightly on Isabella's stomach. "Do you think it'll be a boy or a girl?" She smiled. "Doesn't matter. I just hope they have your stubbornness in your heart." He chuckled. "So, doomed, basically." She leaned into him, laughing softly. "Maybe a little." Then she looked out at the horizon. "You know what's crazy? It feels like everything we've been through, all the pain, the fear, the mistakes, it was leading us here." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, every choice, every moment, it's like the universe knew we weren't done yet." He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "You were right that night, you know, when you said our story wasn't over." She turned to him. "It still isn't." He smiled. "No, it's just beginning." As the last light faded, the two of them sat in quiet peace, the city alive around them, the lake whispering softly against the shore. For once, there were no contracts to sign, no board meetings to attend, no enemies to face. Just love, hope, and a future waiting to be written.